Hello everyone, a warm welcome to you all this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're joining from, for another event in our Black History Year series. My name's Kate Theophilus. I am one of the research development partners here at Westminster, and I'm introducing this event on behalf of the Black History Year steering group. I'm very pleased to be here with two fantastic guests, Aaron Bryant and Barbie Asante. Aaron is curator of photography, visual culture, and contemporary history, and curator of the Johnson Publishing Archives at the National Museum of African American History and Culture at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Prior to the Smithsonian, Bryant was curator of collections and exhibitions at Morgan State University's James E. Lewis Museum of Art in Baltimore. He has lectured widely at academic and cultural institutions, including at Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Duke, the Metropolitan Museum, the Universities of Cambridge and Oxford, and the British Museum. His research has received honours, including from the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library, the New York Public Library, the University of Maryland, the American Association of Museums, the Organization of American Historians, and others. In 2014, Bryant was elected a fellow with the Royal Anthropological Institute in the United Kingdom for his research in visual anthropology and social justice movements. He served as chair of Baltimore City's Special Commission to Review Confederate Monuments and is currently chair of the city's Public Arts Commission. He also serves as a commissioner with the Baltimore City Commission on Historical and Architectural Preservation. We're also joined today by Barbie Asante. Barbie is an artist, curator, researcher, and healer in training. For over 25 years, her artistic practice has explored the politics of place, space, and the ever-present histories and legacies of slavery and colonialism. Employing a Sankofa methodology, Barbie explores the memory and archival injustice through an excavation of the unconstituted embodied memories and archives of Black and people of color through everyday practices and performative processes that include storytelling, institutional interventions, collective writing, reenactment, and creating spaces for transformation, ritual, and healing. Barbie's practice is developed with others, revealing that which is often unspoken, invisible, or buried, to present projects that call us to witness the presence of these narratives and to explore future possibilities. With a deep interest in Black feminist and decolonial methodologies, Barbie also embeds within her work notions of collective study, countless ways of knowing, and dialogical practices that embrace being together and breathing together. Recent exhibitions and projects include Declaration of Independence at the Baltic in Gateshead, Get Up, Stand Up Now at Somerset House in London, A Language to Dwell In for the International James Baldwin Conference in Paris, and she's also shown at the Gallery of Modern Art in Glasgow, at the Venice Biennale, Innova, Nottingham Contemporary, and Rotterdam Art Fair, among others. Barbie is on the boards of 198 Contemporary Arts and Learning and the Women's Art Library. She is a PhD candidate in FREEM here at the University of Westminster. So the format for an hour is a short talk from each of our speakers, around 10 minutes each, after which they will respond to each other's presentations and conversations for 15 minutes or so. And if you have any questions in the audience and you'd like to pose our guests your questions today, pop them in the chat and we'll make sure that we find time to address them towards the end, or as many as we can get through. A quick reminder before we begin to please keep your videos off and mics muted, and reminder that the event will be recorded today and made available on our blog site. So let's begin. With great pleasure, I'd like to hand over to our guests, starting with Barbie.
Hi everybody. I'm going to actually show you a video for pretty much half of my presentation, but before I do that, I really want to just call the names of Nicole Smallman, Biba Henry, and Blessing Olusegun. It's not often that we acknowledge Black women dying, and I'm just going to also just pour a little libation for them. Okay, I'm going to just share my screen. So I'm just going to open with a video from a work, just to really also to follow on from that. And what I would ask you to do as well, and I'm thinking about what you're hearing when you see this video is just really maybe take a moment to be here, listen to what is being said, especially because we're not together, and I'm just trying to think about how we kind of create those our gestures of togetherness in these moments. Take a breath, and I just really want to also just maybe have a little think about what our movements look like, what we want our movements to look like, and how we might want to shape our worlds. So I'm going to just play the video.
Draws on the West African traditions of Momome. Momome is cleansing. Momome is a cleansing of the community. A ritual to re-establish the social, cultural, and political order. A communal and societal purification. Momome is for us. Momome is for women. We do this for us, to protect and purify ourselves. We evoke Momome as a symbolic shield against outside dangers that threaten us. In Momome, we witness each other, care for each other, speak to each other, protect each other, defend each other. We also draw on the long-time traditions of our indigenous cultures and our activist and healing communities. For us, the circle provides space for fresh possibilities, connections, collaborations, and understanding. Our circle will hold the tensions and emotions that will contribute to our transformation and support us to use our collective energy to take action. This is our process. It is not about changing others, but rather an invitation for us to change our relationship to ourselves, our communities, and the wider world. Calling Delegate Rosanna Raymond.
Omuri, omuri ho e ho, pupuhi ki a ho, miri miri ta kuhuti na whakamari e tahaku wahirua no te riri oro raru mahara he. Ka haere heo ki te mahunga, apiki ake, kaki ake te mahunga. Miki miki te mate puhuna, eri te tonu ki te whakatau aki. Humbia ki ngā maunga kia puri a koe. He ngā hoa tawhiri mate a he homahi mo mahara, he re re runga he ra haro, Tahai o whia hoangi, hui a tā kuhuti nana. Whakahora taku kaha, whakapaenge horuia, whakawate te huarahi ki te pono me te tika ki te ao marama e.
So I wanted to open with that. I'm just really seeing that the video is not finished. I'm just gonna stop it here. I wanted to open with that just to kind of give you a little flavor of some of the work that I do and ways in which I suppose I'm kind of bringing, I think really I wanted to talk about bringing the kind of thinking about healing and transformation into the work. I mean, you know, 2020 and much of the already that we've had to 2021 has been quite a time of some reckoning for us. So a lot of us, it's what we already know. Some people are just seeing some of the things, but I've spent a lot of time speaking about it, acting on it, crying about it, losing friends, literally losing friends, both in the death sense and also having to let go of relationships that are no longer working. So I've been really thinking about the whole way in which we have this opportunity to sort of really think about the ways in which our world can change, but it seems that the general sense from our governments is to really get back to normal. What does normal mean? Well, normal for so many of us will actually mean nothing changes, and that, you know, this year that we've been through will actually continue and lay on top its trauma and much of the things that we really would like to see happen differently. So I just wanted to sort of put that in, and just because a lot of the work that I've been making since 2014 has been, in a way, trying to be in dialogue with what is going on in the world, whether that be the ways in which we're thinking about gender and racism and climate change, Black Death, the lack of movement that we are experiencing here right now. I mean, for example, I feel I'm an artist, I feel compelled to make. So, you know, a couple of things I had to do on the event of the time of the carnival. I got together with a number of people, and we did a reading of Nobisi Phillips' Caribana. I can also put this in the chat, so if you want to listen to our reading, you can do that. But this reading, it kind of talks about carnival and the history of carnival. That carnival is not just about us getting on the street and having a good time on, you know, in August or February or whatever, but it is a container for for the histories of Black people, the histories of our migration, the histories of our oppression. And it is a moment in which our bodies can be free. So Norbise talks about the Totabens and Mazes. So we're all the Totabens and Mazes who can move. And I was very struck by this year, this inability for us to be able to move. And then also I had to make a declaration of independence online, involving like 20. One of the wonderful things about it was it involved 25 women from around the world, which I could never have produced if I had to do it in person. But we also had to create a kind of community around it, and really think about what we would do for togetherness. And I'm not going to say too much more about it, because I think me and Erin could probably pull out some of the things that we, you know, the things that we connect with. But what I wanted to just say about it in the end is that it was kind of quite an incredible experience. Technology let us down. You know, kind of, we were sort of sitting there trying to go live as we are trying to go live, you know, now all the time. being on the computer while everything just broke down. But there was this amazing sense of kind of a commitment while everybody sat in their different houses and their different places in the world, and just waited. We just waited until we could actually do our declaration. And we, as Black women, as women of color, said what we needed to say in this time to soothe our souls. And I'm just going to leave it there for now, and hand over to Aaron.
Yeah, thank you, Barbie. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully this will work. Alrighty, can everyone see my screen? Alrighty, okay, good. So pull out my notes. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is something that I've been doing for a while now, going back more specifically to 2014. The museum I work for, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, began collecting in earnest around Black Lives Matter. So Black Lives Matter collecting and present day protests became sort of a priority for us. How do we collect around what's happening in present day events, and then how do we connect those events that are happening today to our past? And so I'm going to talk a bit about our philosophy around that, and try to interject, you know, some of the objects that we've collected around social justice, particularly from present day, and mixing that in with some objects from the past. On May 25th of last year, Minneapolis police officers detained George Floyd after an employee at a convenience store called 911, alleging that Mr. Floyd purchased cigarettes with a counterfeit bill. 17 minutes after the first officers arrived, George Floyd was unconscious and showing no signs of life. Mr. Floyd suffocated. His neck and breathing were constricted by the knee of one of the arresting officers, and at that moment, we saw a sea change in history. Black Lives Matter related protests were not the first demonstrations organized against police brutality in our nation's history, however. Prior to Black Lives Matter, we have the Rodney King beating and the Los Angeles uprisings of 1992, the long hot summer of 1967, where there were more than 150 to 160 uprisings across the country that were sparked by police-related incidents, including the Newark and Detroit riots in the US that year. Then, of course, there were the Watts riots of 1965. So protests in America against excessive force have crossed time, generations, and geographies. Here, for example, we have a photograph by civil rights photographer Jim Wallace and a protest sign from the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. While we often remember select parts of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I Have a Dream, we forget the more challenging parts of the address and the march's demands for equitable jobs and wages. Access to better education, decent housing, healthcare, and of course, as we see in this sign and photograph, an end to police brutality. Here we, oops, looks like my, oh, okay, there we go. So here we have a close-up of the Jim Wallace photo, and you'll see the protest sign in the crowd here. Both of these objects are examples of strategic response collecting from nearly 70 years ago that relate directly to collecting from George Floyd protests today. Now, the collectors, Sam Edgerton and Jim Wallace, collected and captured a moment in time, a moment in history, at a time the event was happening. They later donated these objects to the Smithsonian. And the donors, of course, understood that the history of this moment, that in very much the same way that we understand the history of similar moments today, in that they knew they were witnessing a key transformation in American history and culture. So our collecting of current event objects is no different from what collectors have done throughout history. Art collectors, for example, have collected contemporary art or commissioned artwork, which meant collecting the art before it had even been created or completed in many cases. You think about the Medici family, Peggy Guggenheim, and the Cohn sisters of Baltimore as just a few examples. Then there are people who have collected mementos from important or everyday events throughout the course of their lives. This might include all of us, actually, who have somewhere in our drawers political buttons and banners from a rally, photographs of a graduation, placards and protest signs, lunchboxes and Barbie dolls, bell bottoms, polyester suits, and platform shoes. So the idea of collecting history as it happens really isn't new. It's been around a long time in a world of collectors. As with the 1963 March on Washington, with Black Lives Matter today, we are witnessing a similar transformation in how we think and talk about issues related to race, justice, and democracy. Central to the African American Museum's approach to contemporary collecting are two primary questions. And we ask these questions really of every historical moment. What are the lessons to be learned from the event? And how do we explore what this moment means in the context of our nation's history and the lives of people today? So with what are the lessons to be learned, this might translate into what are the lessons we can learn from the artifact that says something powerful about our relationships to our past and history's relationship to the present and future? And what does it say about humanity and a history of human progress? Is there a micro-historical or even a global meaning that we can explore in whatever moment we're researching and considering, i.e. what does this moment tell us about the history of different nations within the context of the world? How do we explore what this moment means in the context of our nation's history and lives of people today? Really means how do we interpret and select objects in a way that reflects a cultural past, a social or political past, progress, and sometimes regression. I think that our challenge as a museum and as museum professionals really is to consider the everyday world beyond the object. This opens the possibility for engaging multiple public discussions on our shared past or present, as well as our shared future. What are the social, cultural, and ideological shifts that we are experiencing together? And how do we talk about our experiences as individuals, as well as a nation of people? At the Smithsonian, we can provide a platform and initiate these really difficult kinds of conversations. As the secretary, Lonnie Bunch, who's also the founding director of our museum, I would say museums are not community centers, but we can be central to the communities we serve. So museums, libraries, and archives are really in a position to lead responses to challenging issues that help us to better understand American history and culture, specifically issues related to race, difference, politics, and social justice that are part of our past and present. Through collecting, conservation, exhibitions, and public programs, we provide this platform along with resources and opportunities to a national public to share the ideas, experiences, and perspectives of diverse communities. We can provide this service to researchers and scholars across different fields, ranging from botany and archaeology to art, science, and history. When you think about issues related to environmentalism, for example, that would require input from many different fields, from the arts and humanities to the sciences. And for me, that's what curating really is. We're not only in the business of curating objects. In order to open hearts, minds, experiences, and possibilities for ourselves as individuals and as a collective humanity, we have to curate ideas. So protests this summer really raised a lot of interesting questions and issues regarding the state of the American democracy in general and race relations. More specifically, perhaps it has something to do with other concerns the US was dealing with at the time, including the global pandemic, what was happening politically. and states across the country, and questions regarding the fragility of the American democracy and the strength of the American Constitution that we face each day. But communities nationwide, and even surprisingly, certain cultures and parts of the world that you think would not be connected to some of these issues seem to have taken more of an interest in social justice, equity, and the meaning of democracy in America in particular after George Floyd's death. And what's really interesting is the way that funders and donors are now, here in the US at least, are now looking at ways that they can engage in fostering community discourse to nurture positive and progressive social change. I believe that museums, libraries, and archives are becoming more intentional in their exhibitions and collecting efforts around these issues. So, and looking at protests from the past summer, of course, as a curator of contemporary history, I've begun thinking more critically about the theories and methods I might use to document and preserve this moment in time. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk more about that in our discussion. Thank you.
I think it's you and me now, isn't it? So
yeah,
I was just really thank you for that. It was really striking to see all those images and to kind of. But I was just thinking about, you said something about you know, what does this moment tell us? And I wonder if we could just start there, because I think I also brought in with my presentation some things about this moment. You know, I was particularly thinking, I mean, I really wanted to put in the, oops, there we go, typical. I really wanted to put in the words of, you know, the names of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman and Blessing Olusegun, because, you know, when we've just had this moment here where the, you know, a white woman has died, and we protest, and we should, but we also remember that Black folks don't get remembered, and you know, these women don't get the same kind of outpouring of emotion. So yeah, I think I mean, and I don't know about you, but I've been listening to a lot of conversations and a lot of different things around this moment, and so I'm just kind of, can we just riff on that for a little while, maybe?
Well, yeah, it's really interesting how right now there seems to be so much more overt consternation around race and social justice and democracy. And looking at, I don't know, hundreds of photographs from protests this summer, it's just, it's remarkable how race, gender, and sexual orientation are sort of underlying conversations that are happening. Even just this morning, you know, there's news in the US about a business in Atlanta in which someone goes in and he murders these folks in, at this place of business, and how many of those women were Asian women. And so he says it wasn't, he wasn't motivated by race. It wasn't a race crime. And then he's, to make it better, I guess, he said it supposedly it has something to do with his sexual addiction. So it's not about race, it's about gender, and it's about straightness. And,
yeah.
And that's a much better, it's better to be called misogynist, you know, sexually addicted, you know, serial killer than it is to be called a racist. Even though you were targeting women of a certain race. And so it's just really interesting where we are right now. And I think part of it is because we've had such a difficult time in talking about the realities of race and gender and sexual orientation, and how that informs not only our individual perspectives, but how it has also shaped who we are culturally as multiple communities, and what impact then all of that has on everything that community or that culture produces. So if we're talking about a nation, for example, if individuals are sort of indoctrinated into a certain kind of paradigm about their place within the world, and indoctrinated by a much larger sort of meta narrative of um, relationships between races and genders and sexual orientations, then how does that reflect in the way that that culture or community or nation as a culture and a nation as a community um, then shapes um, all the other perspectives that impact legislation, laws, and going back to your earlier comment, whose lives matter. You know, that's a much larger cultural perspective. So this guy who goes in and, you know, murders these folks or kills these folks is really a reflection of a much larger problem. The protests from the summer in America were really a reflection of a much larger problem around race and gender, because gender comes into it. And we talk about sexual orientation, you know, the deaths of transgendered people in transgendered communities, how that goes unnoticed. And then, you know, all the other events that happened, including events in Washington at the Capitol, for example, and how the different perspectives that people have on what happened at the Capitol. I mean, there are multiple perspectives. And the question is, well, why are there multiple perspectives if we all saw the same thing? And I don't know, how do we address that as a community of people, as a culture or a nation of people, when we can all see the same thing, but because of our cultural paradigms, we rationalize them differently, interpret them differently, justify them differently. And I think that might be at the heart of, you know, some of the work that you're doing, as well as.
Yeah, I think also, while you were saying that, I was also thinking about stuff that's been going on in Ghana that's really just been disturbing. I don't know if you've seen that there was an awful incident at an LGBTQ center, the first one that was to be opened, and the president's kind of narrative around that. And I was also really struck by noticing that even the people that were defending were really difficult to say lesbian, gay, queer. You know, they found it really difficult to say you know, who cares with who sleeps with who or whatever, but they could not actually kind of utter those words. And I feel like this moment has given us when you were speaking, I was thinking about forgetting. Now, living in the UK, the UK loves to forget, you know, it has any relationship to us, you know. So, you know, in a sense, the invitation that was given, as we know from the kind of whole Windrush thing now, the invitation that was given from 1948 to people from former colonies to come here and help rebuild this country, people who had fought in wars for Britain as British people, you know, was quickly changed into an invasion. And this idea of an invasion is that we'd invaded, and we still have that kind of, I feel like we still have that, there's still that narrative, as if, because I'm thinking about the current legislation that has gone through around post-protest, and the escalation that happened on just on Sunday here, inappropriate way in which the police handled women that were protesting and you know, were standing up and speaking out about violence against women. I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about the legislation going through, and they blamed it on the Black Lives Matter protests. They blamed it on the statues that came down, you know. And yeah, I'm just kind of like, this moment also is telling us, and there are a lot of people that want to shut down the things that are being revealed. I think there's something really wonderful about, I've been really thinking about how difficult it has to be being still, but there's also something that's really kind of wonderful about this moment of stillness that allows something to be seen. Because once we stopped, people were able to see. It's what people do with that seeing that I'm curious about, because, you know, people started to see, and I don't know about you, but I got text messages from white friends saying, are you okay? Blah, 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 lots of different things happening. I got kind of offers of all kinds of stuff. People got money, you know, all kinds of things. And it's kind of quietened down. It's quietened down kind of a lot. It's quietened down a lot here. And I think also the other thing is that we can't, the reason as well, by bringing the voice, the names of Nicole and Blessing and Biba here, was also because they can't, it's easier for Britain to sort of almost compartmentalize it, you know. So Black and woman can't sit in the same space, so to speak. So, you know, these things are quite difficult, you know, quite difficult juxtaposition at the moment. That's kind of what I'm seeing. The other thing that I feel like I'm also, you know, which people got really sort of up in arms about in the UK in June, was this idea about the police and policing, and what we should be doing about policing and defunding the police. Because this narrative has also come up now as well, because the way the police have behaved with these women. And it's such a kind of scary, you know, prospect, even though the prospect of that in abolitionist thinking is that you could redirect funds, you know, to other more important community services. And right now, I mean, in the UK, we are going to have an NHS that is completely, you know, going to be bereft of funds, and also probably bereft of people who are exhausted and traumatized. I don't know, I think I said a lot there. I don't know if you want to follow up on that.
Yeah, well, I will say that this moment is absolutely exhausting. And yeah, the idea of, you know, I think language is really important. And in moments like this, you know, language sort of gets twisted around. I know that with the movement to reevaluate how funds are allocated, and, you know, among law enforcement agencies, is something that folks are looking at seriously. But, you know, the idea of saying defund the police, which, you know, to a certain degree, isn't necessarily the issue, I think, right? It's where's the money going, but also what do you do with that money, and how do we do a better job in recruiting? But after, you know, this past year, and even past several years, you know, to what extent are people absolutely exhausted and terrified, quite honestly? How do you rebuild, you know, agencies after, you know, what we've experienced around the world, really, what we've been experiencing? I don't know. So, you know, one of the things that I am very much interested in, and this is, and particularly this past summer, my intervention really in social justice, you know, I've spent a lot of time studying social justice movements, and how do you analyze movements as cultures and as communities of people? How do movements define themselves as a community and as a culture? And so for me, it's the intervention has always been through the arts and artists, you know, and that's photography and visual culture. That's sort of how I got into photography and visual culture. And so this past summer, I was really interested in engaging the ways that artists use their practice as forms of resistance and resilience. And most certainly, I think your work is an example of that. Would you be able to, and this is sort of impromptu, but it may not be a fair question because you haven't had time to think about it perhaps, but the whole idea of looking at resistance and communities, resistance and art as activism and reflecting a culture, perhaps, and as reflecting a community. Do you see your work as helping to create community in some ways? I guess is the first question.
So, Yeah, I mean, whether they be really small, I think I have to think about them small and think about the notion of emergence, you know, like emergent strategies, because you know, there's never enough funding or never enough capacity to do that. But I do think about these, yeah, they do create communities. They create communities that are, so for example, Declaration of Independence. So prior to that, I did a project which was called Baldwin's Nigger Reloaded, that which reflected on James Baldwin's visit to London in 1968, which was filmed by Horace Ove. And I take on the notion that Moten and Hani think about study. And I did this with work with a group of young people. And they formed themselves into a collective, which is called Sorry You Feel Uncomfortable. And my thing was, we did our work, we did our performances, we did our kind of thing, and then I let them go. And subsequently I let them go, and they have become curators, and they are activists, and they are, you know, one is a colleague of mine in Cream. You know, they become all of these different people. So what I have given, I gave them access to all the spaces that I had access to, some people that I had access to, you know, and so in a way that community starts other communities. And with Declaration of Independence, I suppose that this is kind of similar model, except I think perhaps we might need each other a bit more as women and women of color. In women, I'm speaking about trans women as well, and people who identify as non-binary. So especially around, and this community is global. That people who've been involved in this live in Australia, in Norway, in Amsterdam, in Canada, in London, Scotland. But one of the things that I think has been really, really important, two things happened. One of our women was, I think you would describe it as not kidnapping, but her mother kind of left her in Somalia and put her in one of these institutions that kind of reforming women, and then we managed to, through our networks and our connections, to support her sister to get her out. Okay, so like whether that was money, whether that was like, you know, just contacts, just through kind of sending out, so that there is the performance, and then there is this you know, kind of community of care. And this has been such an important thing during this whole kind of quarantine as well. It just in being able to kind of like come together to mourn, to speak, to create action. Particularly, I'm really thinking about the relationship that I have to the sisters that we worked with in Norway, who have also, you know, kind of made a like very powerful kind of stand, and much more of a kind of visual experience, you know, or not visual, visceral experience of bringing their concerns to the foreground. So yeah, it's, I suppose, like you said, I do my activist work through my artistic practice, you know. Yeah, I hope that answers you in some way.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. There's really no right answer, right? I mean, I'm very interested in how artists sort of respond, and how we all sort of respond in many ways. And I'm looking here, there are a number of questions.
Oh, there's so many.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if, you know, Kate or someone was going to read the questions to us and we respond, but I'm just going to jump in if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I haven't had a look, so you start.
Okay, so I'm looking at, it looks like one of the first questions is, how do you think the summer protests may become an exhibition inspiration in the future? And I'll let you go first.
Ooh, you see, it's interesting. You know, I'm talking here with a museum, someone who works in museums, and I'm an artist that works in galleries and also has a real kind of antagonism to this idea of that we always have to create some form of exhibition and exhibit things and kind of keep exhibiting things, and the idea that we look And so actually in 2020, there was an exhibition of the protest in Margate, along with the exhibition, there was an exhibition at Turner Contemporary that a friend of mine curated, Paul Goodwin, which was artist from American South. And alongside that, they had this exhibition of all the protest materials from Black Lives Matter protests in Margate. And actually it was quite a strange exhibition. I wonder, like what you said as well, whether it's not just about kind of making it, because you mentioned in your presentation, it's not just about making it sort of visible in that way, but it is therefore like research and many other kinds of ways of thinking about what happened at that moment. And I also wonder if it's about also reflecting on it. So it's not right now that we look at this material, but maybe it's something that we might think about and how we think about it. And also, I think maybe also how we think about it, not just as material that we look at, but also activate the dialogues around it.
You know, I absolutely agree. And I think you articulated that so well that that will be my synopsis from now on, because that's absolutely it. You know, it's interesting. I had a conversation last night with an LGBTQ activist, someone who did organizing across the country during the 90s. And so this person was interested in talking to me about our archives. And she goes, and so what I imagine is that we would do an oral history that would be part of the exhibition. And so people are sort of assuming, you know, that, oh, you donate the stuff and it becomes an exhibition, and not realizing that, you know, you're an artist, you're looking to produce and create work, however that happens. And I'm a historian, and I'm interested in studying and researching history and preserving that history, preserving these perspectives and experiences, and that's our primary purpose. And so it's interesting how people assume that, you know, your primary objective is to do an exhibition, as opposed to right now, let's just collect to preserve so that this moment doesn't get lost. These voices, these you know, these representations of humanities don't get lost, and the experiences don't get lost, particularly you know, with curators or researchers 100 or 200 years from today. We need to make sure certain perspectives are preserved. And so that's really what my job is as a curator. And but I love what you said. Part of that, of course, is what you said about we have to have time for reflection. Reflection on what the moment means, but also self-reflection, like what is my role within the context of whatever this conversation is, so that I can understand what my best contribution can be to contributing to a long-term discussion. And that's part of what my presentation was about, is that Black Lives Matter, our museum is really about 400 years of Black Lives Matter. So it isn't about just the summer. Yes. It's about the connection between the artists working today and the artists who were working during the 1700s and the 1800s, and this idea of resilience and resistance. And so that's what I have to work towards as a historian. I have to reflect on what is the relationship between today and the 1963 March on Washington, that protest sign? And what is the relationship between that and lynching during the turn of the 20th century, post-World War I, and the relationship to 19th century violence against Black people? And then even thinking about that globally, how does this relate to the experiences of marginalized communities in different parts of the world? Because the point of the exhibition isn't to sort of showcase the object and say, look, we collected this stuff, but to say, here's the humanity, and this is how you connect to it. This is how it is about you, or this is how this is a part of your past and your history as well. So your humanity is also reflected in this. When I was collecting at Lafayette Square, or went out to Lafayette Square, and thinking about what kinds of objects I wanted to collect, I was really drawn by the work that was being produced by artists, the murals on the window panels and that kind of thing. And the one protest sign that actually stuck out to me, which was posted on a fence, was just a sign that said, "I miss my dad." And that sign there said everything to me about, this is voice that could be lost or an experience that could be lost. That this isn't about political ideology for a lot of people. It's about the humanity and um, and the loss of humanity. And how do we get people to reconnect to that? You know, so that idea of needing time to reflect on what does this, getting back to the questions, what does this moment actually mean in the context of our nation's history and our lives today?
That just moved me so much, that kind of affective, because the next question asked which was one of the most memorable images, and that I think that speaks to so much, because George Floyd, Philandro Castile, all these other people, there is a child there that is going to be saying, I miss my daddy.
Yeah.
Right? There is a child there. And also I was just really struck in your conversation. I was just thinking about the curating and care, and my daughter, who was part of Sorry You Feel Uncomfortable, has a curatorial collective called Languid Hands, and they talk about their work is their curation as being in defense of Black life. And I was just like stunned when they said that. I was like, that's exactly what I've been doing. And I think what you're expressing is exactly that, and exactly what you've been doing in the work. Let's see about other questions. I've had something, what if I doing creativity in lockdown? Well, I wasn't not going to do it. I have to find a way to do it, but I wouldn't necessarily speak to. So I think that the kind of narrative of the idea of being creative in lockdown, as in, let's all do creative projects, kind of, it was an urgency, not an it's like, I have to make something that makes this response. It was almost I think you might be talking about us doing the reading of the Norbiste Phillips, The Carnival. It was like a visceral response that if we can't get on the street, what are we gonna do? Because if you want to call it, for a better word, creativity is much more than that, in a sense. Like, the creativity that brings carnival to the street is not just a virtuosity of dance or virtuosity of making. Or a skill in making. It is a necessity to move spirit.
Myself. Yeah, I would definitely add to that. And in terms of creativity, I think not just as an artist, even though I consider curating both science and art, and I most certainly like to think I'm approaching my curatorial practice from a more creative standpoint, but thinking creatively for me, how do we use objects in a creative way that touches people's humanities? And then more importantly, how do we bring people together to talk about these objects and their own humanities and their own experiences to that? And so through, whether it's through public programs and actual formal sort of discussions, or online, what are the ways that we can engage people online? And we did actually create a website called Voices of Resistance and Hope. So we actually produced this website in response to COVID, but in the process of creating the website, responding to COVID and the global pandemic, George Floyd happened in May. Yeah, so we have the pandemic, everything shutting down in March, and then by May, George Floyd's death and protest around that. And so then we opened up Voices of Resistance and Hope, so that we could create the sense of community online, sort of like social media to a great extent. So people who were shut in, we were all stuck in our houses. There was a way for us to connect and to communicate and to cope. I think if I were to use 3 words: connect, communicate, cope. And people were sharing their ideas, but it also was a platform for artists where people were submitting artwork, their poems, their music, their stories, and sharing ways of coping. I make soup and here's a recipe, kind of thing. And I thought that was such a wonderful, creative way to engage people around the humanity of all of these moments, where they can find a way to connect to folks and express themselves and share their experiences or parts of themselves with this community in a way that I thought was really healthy. And so as a curator, it's not just about, as you said, we need time to reflect and how to make the best use of ourselves and whatever voice or platform we have. It's not just about collecting and doing putting it in a case and doing an exhibition. It's like, how do we make the best use of whatever platforms we have to create a sense of community and humanity?
There's a really interesting question here about how can art address such complexity. I think we've addressed quite a lot of the questions in the thing, but this one I think is really interesting about without becoming didactic or purely militant. So I think the person is asking, Andreas, this person is asking, to put it differently, what is the difference, if there is indeed one, between art and protest? I personally have, I wonder, and I think it really depends on in what kind of body this work is coming from, right? Because what I discovered when I started becoming an artist was that I couldn't just be an artist. It was not possible for me to just come to be an artist and to walk into a space and just present my art. And actually, you know what, I came to accept that. And I also came to accept that because I also think, Kate mentioned that I've been thinking about this Sankofa methodology, is that I'm also thinking about what would art have meant, or what does art mean to African people, right? What is it? We don't have the same kind of, it lives in our everyday. It lives every day in every, I love the way that, I think it's Christina Sharp describes her mum in the beginning of In the Wake, on Blackness and Being, making kind of life, creatively making life for a family, for a Black family, because, there were things that they were lacking. There were ways in which we kind of use that. So to me, I'm not sure if I need to express myself, what's the difference between art and protest? Well, I've talked to you before already about carnival. Now, carnivals were protests. The fact that, you could not, Africans were not, enslaved people were not invited initially to these masquerades that were happening, in plantations, particularly in the kind of more sort of French, Spanish speaking. And they made, Juve and other ways of doing it, and they mimicked and they performed and they made, costumes that mimicked massa. And so to me, I don't know if there is any difference between art and protest. I think that, and I also want to kind of go towards this idea of didactic and militant. I mean, to express yourself, is that to express something, to express that Black Lives Matter, is that a didactism? I mean, do you know where the statement comes from? The statement Black Lives Matter has not just the lineage of this statement at that moment in 2014, but also it kind of really goes back to, if you read their whole stuff, something like the Combahee River Collective statement that was stated that, when Black women are free, everybody is free. And this is what the narrative is. All right, within it, there could be some more didactic or more militant, if you believe it so, things within it. But I don't know whether, if an artist, I'm thinking like, a Black women artist for Black Lives Matter, for example, that Simone Lee pulled together, and we also had some work here. How would it be you know, just because we're artists, we're doing it in galleries, why would it be so militant to do that? This is what motivates me. And, you know, you're muted, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting. I had to laugh because, yeah, the whole idea that there is, how do you measure? I was thinking as you were talking, yeah, how do you measure to what extent something is didactic and when is it too didactic? Uh, you know, how do you measure that?
Mm.
And who's making that determination? Because I thought about some of the art that I was looking at, not just the work that was happening on the streets, but even some well-established artists who were responding to, you know, the death of Breonna Taylor, for example, in the Amy Sherald portrait. And, you know, it was on the cover of Vanity Fair magazine, I believe. So it was commissioned by Vanity Fair. And it's just a beautiful portrait of Breonna Taylor and all of her humanity. It's just beautiful. And there are going to be people who say that's too didactic.
It's too didactic, yeah.
Yeah, or Titus Gaffar, who did a beautiful portrait of a Black woman with an afro holding a baby, but the baby's been cut out of the space. So it's a riff on the Madonna and Child iconography, the religious iconography and art of the Madonna and Child, of course. So to what extent is he didactic, but all of the other painters before him, going back to the, you know, the era of religious painting and the, you know, the Italian Renaissance, painting something similar, the Madonna and Child, or even earlier than that, the Egyptian sculpture, or even, you know, their African artifacts in which the mother and her relationship to the child is commented on in some way. Why is some didactic and others are not? Others consider great art, but this is, you know, so, you know, it raises for me, what is the question? What does didactic mean, and who determines that, and how do we?
Yeah, and as you were speaking, I did sort of think in my mind about Declaration of Independence and my opening in Declaration of Independence, and how I purposely use didactism, or a form of didactism, performative didactism, so that, you know, I'm drawing from all of these, like, you know, modes of address that are supposed to be inclusive of everyone. Let's talk about the Declaration of Independence that we know, you know, kind of globally, the American Declaration of Independence. Well, it's not a document that actually is speaking to the inclusion of everybody. It's not speaking to the healing of everybody, but it uses this kind of this sort of language around it. And so in a sense, like, if there is that, to answer Andreas's question, then yeah, I used that performatively to, you know, to kind of, I would say, to, you know, to make a point. And I think that might be also a strategy.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I also want to make sure that folks don't miss your point about carnival and how it's a form of resistance, you know, throughout the diaspora, because even, you know, today, Mardi Gras, New Orleans, which is, you know, world renowned, and people come from all over the world to participate in, you know, Mardi Gras in New Orleans. And yeah, that was a form of resistance. Everywhere all over the world, people were creating these carnivals to say, I am here, I have humor, I have humanity, you know. And then I was also thinking about the Negro spiritual, or even Phyllis Wheatley in 1772 with her poem on tyranny and slavery. You know, so, and that was a form of resistance. And even her writing poetry as an African woman in the US during the 1700s, that was absolute resistance. And so, you know, that resistance comes in so many ways, big and small. And those are the moments that I'm interested in as a curator. Those are not overlooked. We know, we recognize the signs that say no justice, no peace. And, you know, we are here, we are queer, get used to it. You know, we're used to that as being a form of protest. But going back to my original statement about our museum being about 400 years of Black Lives Matter, you know, the entire existence of Africans in any nation really has always been about resistance. even in maintaining one's culture in the face of that culture being erased.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. That is, I was just also thinking about reggae music. I mean, you know, would people kind of look at, I mean, the way that reggae has been consumed around the world. You know, I was listening to something on Marcus Garvey the other day, and reminded of Bob Marley's, you know, with the, you know, use of Marcus Garvey's speeches, you know. So what is that? Is that a form of like militancy that's in, because, you know, in Redemption Song, it's, as much as it does speak to that, it's also a kind of, it's a comfort. It is something that is very important, and I would say, you know, speaks to so many things. In fact, Nobise, to bring in Nobise Philip again recently, the Zong piece that she does, which is a remembrance of the 171 people that died, were thrown overboard the Zong ship, and, you know, the ship owners claimed insurance. There was somebody singing Redemption Song.
Yeah.
You know, it was like a recovery of their souls.
Yeah.
And it was about giving them, like you said, humanity.
Yeah, and I would say that at least in the arts, when I think of the term didactic or even militant, I mean, you know, I think either can be okay. I often get the question about objectivity. As a historian, as a researcher, what is the role of objectivity? And I said, well, I don't think there is such a thing as objectivity, which implies didacticism to a certain degree, and militancy when you're not objective, right? That somehow you're not. But in all research, even the stuff that's collected, the stuff that's remembered, and the stories that are told are absolutely subjective. Someone's making that decision and deciding what are the important questions to ask and what are the ones we're going to ignore, and therefore what are the voices and experiences we ignore. So there's no such thing as objectivity, and I would say that all research, and to a certain degree all art, is didactic. Even with abstract expressions, Picasso was didactic. You know, Jackson Pollock was didactic. Monet, they were all being didactic because they were asserting their subjectivities by going against the grain. And they were being militant. And so throughout the 20th century, art has always been didactic and militant in many ways. It's just that some do a better job than others, perhaps. You know,
or some that live in particular kinds of bodies are considered to be more, you know, problematically militant, or, you know.
And then I was going to say, and the role of the researcher, some are ignored and others are not, because particularly in Black communities all over the world, we're starting to rediscover, or we're starting to discover and see for the first time artists who have been marginalized and ignored for so many cultures of artists, nations of artists that have been ignored for so many centuries. And now we're starting to recognize, wow, they have something important and new to say.
Thank you so much. I would just like to take this opportunity. Thank you so much to our speakers, Aaron and Barbie, on behalf of the Westminster Black History Steering Group. We'd like to just, I could listen to you. I could listen to you for hours more, both of you, this discussion. And thank you so much for picking up on so many of the themes and the questions that our audience completely engaged with. And just, again, I'm sure they all could have gone on for hours just listening to explore those ideas. So on behalf again of the Black History Steering Group, I'd like to thank everybody for attending this event as well. Fantastic speakers who've left us with so much to think about and explore in and beyond the relationship between art and activism and resilience and resistance and curation and creativity and protest and being in the world. So thank you so much for this. For everybody attending, we are recording this session because I'm sure, just like me, you will need to pore over it many more times just to really digest and think about and develop a lot of those ideas. Quick reminder that the recording for this event will be on our blog site, and the link for our blog site Paula has very kindly put in the chat. Our next event is on the 22nd of March, 5 p.m. and thank you for that beautiful segue there, Barbie, because it's on music. And so we'll have a panel of UK music artists discussing music of the Black experience. And you can register for this event through the blog site link, which Paul is putting in the chat. So thank you all again very much. Goodbye, everybody. Be safe, be
Sarah?
well. Oh,
Sarah,
sorry, Aaron, yeah, please.
Yeah, one question. I really like the questions, and I would love to continue talking to Barbie at some point. We are kindred spirits. And so is there a way that you can share the chat with as many people as possible? Because I think the questions are really important. I would even...
Yeah, the questions were great.
The questions were wonderful, and yes, we will download the chat, and I'll have a discussion with Paula about how we can make that available for everyone. And if, my goodness, if we could have you guys back to chat, continue the conversation at some point.
We'll talk and then we'll see what we can offer.
Yeah, that's you know, I'm always open, and I love talking to you, Barbie. So
Same. Yeah.
Maybe you guys should host your own like podcast together.
Maybe we could do that.
Think about that thing.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much.
Alrighty. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for listening to us, and take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.